WordNerds! It's Sunday, October 1st. We're really excited to be here on almost the 4-year anniversary of our first ever WordNerds video going up. So lots of exciting things. Yeah, that was yesterday. We're 4. We're going to preschool. Yay.
Oh, that's cool. We're learning our ABC.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, our channel could be learning how to read. Tender. But today's chat is about preparing for National Novel Writing Month, which is coming up in November. If you've never heard of it, we love it. Obviously, we're spending every Sunday, except for Book Club Sunday in October, preparing for NaNoWRIMO. It is where writers all over the world come together and try to write 50,000 words, or the equivalent of a short novel, in 30 days. There's 30 days in November, right? 30 days.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Had to do some month math in my head for a second there.
Month math.
Right? If you're new, welcome. We are the WordNerds. We're so glad to have you here. We're missing a couple of our number, but Rachel's here now too. Hello.
Sorry, my bus just decided to not show up, so I had to wait half an hour for the next one, but right on time.
Oh.
Yay, public transit.
Hooray, so fun.
Today we're talking about choosing an idea to write for NaNoWRIMO, or if you're struggling to come up with ideas, we'll also talk a little bit about how we find our ideas. And we welcome any nano-related questions in the discussion section. We'll try to answer them all on air, but if we don't have time, we also have a very large database of videos. We have something like 1,200 videos. You can go to WordNerdsVlog.com to search those. So the first question we're going to start with is, are there any consistencies in how you guys get ideas? Usually the question is like, where do you get your ideas? But that is always a horrifying question as a writer, because it's like literally everywhere. But are there any consistencies among ideas that end up having the legs to be a full story for you? I have Emma first.
I find that I usually get most of my ideas when I'm like regularly writing and writing a lot. Like the more I write, the more ideas I have for like more stories, which like can sometimes be frustrating because it's like, no, I need to focus on this instead of all these shiny new ideas. But like it really is like the more because I'm like putting my brain into that like creative space. And so like I'm thinking creatively, and so I'm coming up with more. And also just a lot of times it's when I'm also like reading a lot and like watching movies and things like that. So a lot of other forms of art will help me get ideas too.
Definitely. I have Kelly up next.
I'd say about half my ideas come the same way as Emma's, mostly with like if I'm falling in love with some other art thing, a movie, a book, or whatever, and it just kind of becomes a mashup in my head of, oh, well, what if this? Or, oh, this would be so much better if this. It evolves over time, and that's probably the most consistent thing between my two types of ideas of like what it starts out as is not what it finishes as. But the other one is mostly like a lot of my favorite ideas come from dreams, which isn't helpful. But like I'm going through my idea list, and there's some like really cool scenes in here that need to turn into books at some point. But who knows?
They will. I have Kyra next.
I also am influenced really strongly by like other types of media that I'm like currently into. And usually what ends up happening is I'll take like something like really, really broad from like several different places. So I'll be like, oh, I really like this sibling dynamic in the original, so I'm gonna like have a book about siblings. And I'm also like really into this like colonial America setting because of Hamilton. And so I'll like merge those two elements with like 10 other elements that I think of from other places. And yeah, weird things happen, but it works.
Rachel?
I think consistently I get ideas from pictures and photos and artwork. So there's a couple of artists that I follow on Pinterest and Tumblr and the kind of thing that I love their art. And so a couple people on Twitter as well. If I can remember anything, I'll see if I can put it in the the description box or the comments down below. So usually I like people that do a lot of fantasy artwork, and so I'll just kind of look at the photo of like, yo, that's super cool. Like, I want to build something on that character because that's a really cool character. Like, oh, that scenery is so beautiful. Like, I could set a whole book in that city or that kind of thing. And then the other half is yeah, kind of the same thing of like, I take an idea that someone already took, and I'm like, I don't like the way that they wrote this. I'm gonna rewrite it as something else. No, and also poetry because I'm a lit major, so I have to read a lot of old poetry. And some of it is actually pretty cool. It's just in poem form. So I'm like, I can turn that into a story. Or I really like that sentence. Like, I'm going to make that something. Yeah.
For me, I mean, obviously, you guys have hit all the high notes. I do have very vivid dreams, particularly nightmares. So I like to like keep a notebook by my bed. And one of the things I've noticed in general with ideas, but particularly when you're trying to keep track of dreams you've had, the more you write them down and the quicker you write them down after you wake up, the better you get at remembering your dreams. And so all of the big ideas I've had have been like, particularly the worlds have been in some way inspired by like, oh, I had this stress dream the other night where instead of a coral reef, it was a bunch of tentacles and it was like a monster that kept me on this island. And now I need to write that book. Yeah, we had some questions about NaNoWRIMO in particular, about like the technicalities of how it works, what you can write, what you can't. And really, it's up to you. If you want to write fan fiction, go for it. If you're doing rewrites, go for it. Most people try to write a brand new book that they've never written before, but all that really matters is that you're writing every day and you're trying to hit 50K. And other than that, like, they're not gonna be like, oh, this doesn't count. Yeah. You can go to nanowrimo.org. I put a link to it in the description already. And you can set up an account there. And they should have it set up now so that you can make a novel. I was a bad host and did not double check that beforehand.
I've been getting a lot of emails from them about getting ready, so I feel like it's probably up.
Yeah. But you can get an account set up there, and they have amazing word count trackers. And that's like 85% of the motivation for me is that I like seeing my word counts each day, fill up the charts. If I miss your question, please re-ask it. Obviously, I'm making my way down from the top. There's a lot of amazing discussion happening, and we love that. We love seeing your answers to the questions we ask as well. But sometimes it means I miss the questions, and I promise I'm not ignoring you. We had a couple questions on plotting, which we are going to be talking about plotting in our entire week 3 video. So I will probably save those answers for then, if you guys agree. Are all of us doing Nano this November?
I am not, because my exams.
I'm like sort of like, I'm gonna sign up and I'm gonna track my word count, but I know I'm probably not gonna write 50K. And also I'm not starting a new project, so
yeah, I'm not starting a new project because I have first drafts coming out of my ears. I need like revision time. So
yeah, I'm like 20K into a project right now, and I know I'm not gonna finish it in the next month. So I'm like, I'm gonna still be working on that.
I will be participating. I'm not totally sure how yet. I suspect I'll be trying to write 50K on top of my normal work word count. So,
oof, damn.
Yeah, I'll be doing it as well. I've won twice before, and I would love to win a third time because I've tried 5 times. So I've lost more times than I've won. I've lost. Still got words. So.
You still have a lot of words.
Everyone
lost every single time, so. And I think that is like an important thing to know, like with Nano, is that it's not going to be for everybody. Like, not everybody can do it. Not everybody, like, I know someone, I don't remember who it was now, but someone did like a really good thread this past week about how like doing it like wasn't helpful for them because like it just made them like stressed, so they wrote less kind of thing. So like it's not for everybody, but it's fun to at least try and like don't get like freaked out over it. Like if you get behind, it's not like a huge deal. No one's gonna
like I said,
no one's gonna say you can't be a writer anymore because you didn't do nano correctly. Like
Oh, it would be so bad, just like some troll in the forums. Like, Nano is amazing, and there are no trolls.
Or police.
Or police.
I say this every year, but if by doing Nano you write even a little bit more than you would have otherwise, then it's awesome. And the community is great, and you meet awesome people.
Even if you're only extra productive for like 3 days, you know?
Yep. I mean, try. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like going into it being like, yeah, I'll give it 3 days. You might as well put in a little more than that if you can, but.
I usually find that like day 12 is make or break. Like if I'm still doing it after day 12, then I'll finish the month out. But if if I'm going to quit, it's usually in the first week.
I always get like killed by like Thanksgiving week.
Oh my god, yes.
It's like, never mind. It's like right near the end too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've won Nano several times, and every time I've won it has been like while I've been at school, probably because I've been at school for like 8 straight years or something like that. But like, I don't know. So if any of you are students, like, it's doable sometimes.
Yeah, the first year I ever did it, I was a student. Admittedly, I am not a Ravenclaw, so my grades suffered a little bit because I was doing things like writing in classes. But it was an awesome experience, and I still graduated, so it was fine.
Then you're good.
Well, for me, like, I made a real, like, I kind of carved out Saturday afternoons, which is actually kind of what I do now anyway, just because that's when I have time to write, but.
Yeah. I feel like we're making it sound really, really intimidating and challenging, and it doesn't have to be. Like, it's fun, even if you're just writing a few hundred words a day. Like,
yeah.
Well, and also I'll say also Nano is the thing that helped me learn to write faster. Like even the years I didn't win, I got better. Like I did a lot of word sprints, and I just got to be a better, faster writer.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about Nano is just like the whole community around it that happens in November. Like, yeah, everybody's doing word sprints on Twitter, and so that can be really, even if yeah, you aren't writing like the full 1600 whatever every day, like you can still join in on all that, and like the momentum of it can be really helpful to get some work done.
And I feel like I learned a lot about like how to write a book. The first time I did NaNoWriMo was 2012, and I had been thinking for a couple months that I would be interested in trying to write a book, but I was like really nervous because I had only ever read full novels. I'd never written a full novel before, and there was like all this doubt. I'd written a scene here or there, but I would never really get off the ground. But because of National Novel Writing Month, like there was no time to look back. And so at the end of the month, I had this book, and it was horrifyingly messy, but I knew I could do it, and I knew I could write a book. And like that was how I learned to write a book. I had to learn how to revise it later, but Nano is what taught me how to write one. We had a question. How do you prevent an idea from being similar to an already published work?
there's only so far you can take that because you can't read all the books. None of your friends will have read all the books, and you can't spend 18 years reading all the book descriptions on Goodreads.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could, but you'd never write a book.
Yeah. Yes.
And yeah, you'd just get like depressed because you'd realize it's not possible to write something that's 100% original. So.
Mm. Like everyone, yeah, it's like the same thing that you hear over and over again. Like you're always going to have your own spin on it. Mm-hmm. So unless you're like plagiarizing someone and copying it word for word, like you can still take the idea of the chosen one or the girl getting kidnapped to fairyland or whatever you wish and just, you know, do it with your own characters, and it's just going to come out different every time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, just like particularly for NaNoWriMo, try not, I know it's really hard not to, but try not to worry a lot about it, because November is really about like finding an idea that you're excited about. And if you're excited about it, then you should just go for it and write it. And if there are similarities to other books and you realize it when the book is done, then in revisions you can fix that. Like if you realize that you did 3 or 4 things that are identical to something in the Goblet of Fire, you can go through and change those plot points. But you shouldn't let like the worry stop you from writing the book in the first place.
And I think this is also where it's helpful to like read a lot, especially like within the genre you're going to be writing in, because you'll start to realize that sometimes those things that you think you're like taking from a certain book are actually like things that are in a lot of books. Like if someone was like, oh, this book has 3 kids working together, it's copying it from Harry Potter. But if you read enough like middle grade fiction, you realize it's like almost always 3 kids. Like it's a very common thing.
2 is too few, 4 is too many, 3 is just nice.
It's gotta be 3.
Well, and even because we talked at the beginning, like a lot of us draw inspiration from like other media that we're watching, and it like to me, I've noticed that like even just changing a few like major details has some pretty big. So like for my example, like the last, I think it was Camp NaNoWRIMO book I did, I was heavily influenced by the originals, and so it had like 3 siblings, 2 boys and a girl, and they had like similar personalities to the characters in the originals, but they're not vampires, so that obviously changed a lot. It's YA, so there's like no baby. That changed a lot from what the plot of like the first season of the originals is. So even though there were like a lot of similarities, there were also some very big differences just because I changed some very major plot things, like not vampires.
And a lot of those changes will come as it morphs from like an idea to an outline to a book. So like sometimes like I'll have an idea that I'll be like, oh, this kind of sounds similar to something else. And then once I start writing it, like I end up, yeah, like kind of like Rachel said, like doing a completely different spin on it and like taking it in a different direction, and it ends up not being like the other thing. So
yeah, for sure. We had another question from Kenneth. Can you discuss how to choose a point of view?
I'm so bad at that. Half the books I've written in like one point of view and then like completely rewritten in like maybe like going from first to third or just like completely switching characters. So maybe someone else should.
So this is a hard question for me to answer.
Like you're allowed to do that though. Nano's a great time to write like from the wrong point of view and then change it to revisions.
And say I feel like I'm not good at answering this question because like I don't know, I like figure like very early on I just like know what point of view I'm going to write a book in. So I don't know. I've never had to like figure out what was right. Like I don't know.
Sometimes I feel, yeah, it just kind of comes to you, and that's like this hardest thing to describe. Because you're like, oh, just like let it come to you, and you're like, well, that's not helpful at all.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes I'll just start writing it because I just want to get the idea out, and then as I'm writing it, I'll decide which one sounds better. But I also have a perpetual habit of writing in first person. So I tried. There's a book that I started like a year ago that I tried to write in third. And I gave up on it because I literally just didn't have a plot. I just had a really good first scene. And I'm like, okay, we'll figure it out later. But I like wrote it in third person. I was so proud of myself.
I would definitely say like start writing it, because even when I don't know like before I start, like once I start writing the first scene, I usually figure it out pretty quickly, like if I'm using the right one or not. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's all about your character and the story and how like if you want it to be really like compacted and like it's very much about like your character and their journey, or is it like more about like the world and like the politics or whatever? Like I don't know, it's a lot to do.
Yeah,
And your personal preference too, like what you like better. Like,
well, if you write in first person, it's going to be much more intimate, and you're going to have a wider emotional range in your character because you're talking like so personally. But if you have third person, it's more of a story. If that makes any sense. Good and tight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've noticed that I kind of have different, like, I mean, every book has kind of a different voice anyway, but I have different, like, tones, sort of. Like, if I'm writing in third person, for me, it usually ends up being, like, a lot more, I can't even think of a good way to describe it. But first person is like I'm very in my character's head, and third person is where I go if I want to like kind of provide commentary that might not necessarily be in the character's head. So if I want the reader to be thinking things about what's going on that the characters themselves aren't necessarily thinking, that's where I find third is helpful for me.
For me, it's a lot about the players on the board and how many of them, like how many of their perspectives does the reader need to get the full impact of my idea. So, for example, the book that got me my agent, I knew that I wanted to write from this evil princess's perspective, and that she was going to be straight up evil.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew, because that was like the person who I first wanted to write, she was the one who like came to me first as I was getting the idea. And I knew that hers would be a point of view that was much more difficult to like. I knew that she would need a pretty large foil. Like she would need a good guy up against her, and having those two major characters, I knew like, okay, it needs to be from both of their points of view. I need to be able to show like the cat and mouse of like good versus evil and all of that. If it's 3 or more characters, I always do third person. Always. 2 or less, I'm much more likely to do first person, because I like the voice. Like, I think you have a lot more opportunities to play with voice, and that's my favorite. So
I like third person a lot, but I'm currently doing first person, and I'm enjoying it, but I tend to default to third person because I tend to do multiple points of view. And like, something you do have to keep in mind when you're considering first person is that if you're going to do first person with 1 or 2 characters, the whole story has to take place in places they're in. Like, if you want to show things that your character doesn't experience, you can't do that if they're the only point of view. So
I've also, so right now I'm revising a book that I did for, I think it was last Nano, I don't know, either last Nano or a recent like Camp Nano, but it's 2 points of view, and I'm like trying to alternate, and it does get hard sometimes because it's like, well, everything's happening to the one character, which is also a plot problem sort of, but yeah, so that's an issue you might run into as well, that can be hard if you're doing first person.
So obviously we have like all these little, sorry, I just ate a sweet tart. So obviously we have all these ideas, but not every single idea that we have turns into a book. Sometimes it just like falls by the wayside, or sometimes it gets absorbed into a different idea. So how do you know when your idea has like the capability of becoming a full-length novel?
Definitely when I can't stop thinking about it, I'm much more likely for it to become a book. Like, sometimes I have an idea and I write it down, and then I just like forget about it. Or like I look back at it later and I'm like, no, I don't care about this. But then there are other ideas that like I can't stop thinking. Like, while I'm working on another project, I can't stop thinking about this other one. Or like it pops into my head multiple times, and I keep having like more ideas to build off of it. Because if I'm not having anything to build off of it, if it's just like this book meets this book or something, if that's the whole idea and I never have anything else to go with it, then like that's not a book.
I say when some ideas play nice with other ideas, that's when I'm like, okay, I can use that. Like, if it's just a book being like, oh, this person has, you know, blue eyes, and it's like, okay, like what else?
Cool.
But it's like, oh, like, yeah, cool, like but it's like this you know, this person gets kidnapped, and or like a prince gets kidnapped, and then, you know, this war is breaking out, and then at the same time I have this other idea for, you know, a gathering of magic beings in a tower somewhere, and I'm like, these will all play nice together, let's like make them, and let's bring them all together and make it a book. Sometimes they don't play nice, but sometimes they do.
Because I have more ideas than I could ever write. I always like to cram as many ideas into one.
Yeah, right. Like, what else could I fit in here? Like, what else will possibly be here?
To answer the original question, for me, it's usually like when the characters that I'm imagining become like real enough.
Too real.
Yeah,
too real.
Yeah, too real. Like, I don't know. I just always, if I have characters I'm invested in, then I can just kind of follow them around. Like once I kind of know how they'll react to different situations, then I just have a lot more I can play with. Because if I do get stuck plotting or whatever, I can just like throw something at them and respond to that if I know the characters well enough. So I think that's kind of what determines for me.
I think I made a video once where I talked about like before I'll start even like plotting a project or really considering writing it, like I have to have like a character and a conflict and a setting. Like I have to have those things. Or like if I just have, yeah, like Rachel said, like this character with blue eyes and can talk to animals, it's like that's cool, but like what's this about? Like,
yeah, what are they gonna do?
I have to have like a conflict for them to be responding to before I can actually write something.
Yeah. Do you guys, is there one idea that tends to come to you more? Because usually we don't get like full, we have everything, all three.
Yeah.
Is there one for you guys that tends to come first? Or is it just all over the place?
Character.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. I'm like, oh, it's like such a cool title, and then I'm like trying to like build stuff up. But some of it's like not really good, but some of it is. Also, just like odd lines. Like I'll just come up with like an odd thing for someone to say, and then I'm like, I need someone to say this. I need to build someone to say that. It's mostly like evil characters. Evil characters and villains always come to mind.
Yeah, I think it's usually characters for me. And even when it's something else, because like the one I'm working on right now, it was actually the setting was the first like idea I had for it. But the characters were like what I was able to flesh out the most to begin with. So it's like even if it's something else, I end up fleshing out the characters more than I do that other thing. Like it always like leads me to the characters.
See, I'm always stuck without characters. I usually start with world building or plot.
Yeah.
Usually kind of a combination of the two. And then I'm like, I need people to make these things happen, and I do not have them.
I had such a hard time with the one I'm working on right now. Like part of my problem was that my first idea was a setting, which I've never had before. It's always either been the characters or like some sort of story concept, which like those two things I think can like link to each other pretty easily. Like once you know a conflict or a story concept, you're like, well, I need a character that like fits into that. Or if you have a character, you're like, well, this is who they are, and so this is like an appropriate conflict for them that they would respond to. But this one was like a setting idea, and so I had the hardest time figuring out the character and especially the plot. Like I think all the word nerds know how much trouble I had just figuring out like what the plot of this book was going to be, because I was like, I don't know. I just have a cool idea for a world.
Yeah, like so casting for characters.
I sympathize because now I realize how hard it is when you don't have characters early on.
Yeah, holding a casting for characters, just like see who shows up. Be like, can you please read these lines? Can you please read these lines with a sad tone? Yeah, who are you really?
I will say sometimes, so like the book Megan and I are writing, I had one character who had like an idea of how I wanted him to be, and he showed up like on the page like exactly Megan knows who I'm talking about, exactly opposite of what I'd envisioned. But it was fantastic. He's one of the best characters in the book.
We wanted a brooding character, and we got like a
and
sassy
he's like the most happy-go-lucky.
Yeah.
I love when characters surprise you.
It didn't like destroy the book or anything, but
that's like
well, that was a turn.
Like it's so weird because I like they come from your own imagination. It should be fine. You should be able to control everything. And like that's always the fun thing. I'm like, oh man, these characters are just not listening to me. And it's like you're writing them. Like, you can do whatever you want. Like, no, they're not paying attention.
I love when you're just like in the middle of writing and like a character shows up that you weren't planning on, and they end up being like, because that happened to me in one book. I remember like because it was like my characters are doing something and I was like, oh well, I need them to like encounter a character for this one conflict. So like they encountered this character and like suddenly like I remember that was like one of the like most like I don't know, I was like in the groove and it was like the scene came out and I was like, who is this character? I don't where did you
just show up? Yes,
yeah,
I love it. Or like someone will just like say something and I'm like, whoa there, okay, like this is not like I remember writing
like
this.
You.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, interesting. I remember writing this one scene where like my characters, I needed to get them from here to here in this scene, and the characters they weren't having it, and I had to rewrite it like 4 times because they always went off on this tangent. And I'm like, no, like come back. I need you to do this. You stay here. Just say this and then say this. Read your lines. Like, just. Of course, that just makes like no sense to anybody who's not a writer at all. They're like, what in the hell are you talking about?
Yeah. So I feel feel like we maybe brushed it on this a teeny bit talking about characters. But when you only have one of those things, how do you then make a full idea? Like, say you only have characters or you only get the world. How do you make a whole idea from that?
I just kind of look at.
Sometimes I like to do this terrible thing where I write an entire draft with no world building. I don't recommend it.
It goes back to my thing with like seeing what other ideas play nice with that one. So I'll just kind of just continuously keep writing stuff down, and then every once in a while I go back to my whole idea list and I'm like, oh, I completely forgot about that. Like that would actually go pretty well with this one, or like, yeah, I could put this supervillain into that world, or I could give that character that attribute, and that would make this really cool.
And I think there should definitely be like a connection between those three things, between your plot and your character in a setting. Like they should all feed into each other. Like if you have a character and you know something that they're like really scared of, then that is probably going to be related to the plot. Like the plot is going to involve them like facing that fear in some way. So like, yeah,
always remember that you do have a level of control and you can layer these things together. Like if something's not working, but you're really enjoying it, but it needs to be different for the story to work, you don't get to say like, oh, the characters are in charge. No, you reel it back in, go over it again, and make it work. There's only so far I will let my characters push me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things I look for too is conflict. My favorite stories they have strong characters, but they're just packed full of conflict. And so, like, if I have a world idea, what character is going to be least equipped to live easily in that world? Or if I have a character, like, what thing are they going to be so afraid to face? And then I make that the plot. And just really examining fears, I guess.
Yeah.
And I kind of mentioned this earlier. For me, if I know who a character is, then I know how they'll respond to a situation. So if I even kind of have a vague idea of like what the conflict of the book is going to be, I can just like throw obstacles at them and have them jump over them because I know how they'll respond to anything I throw at them. So
yeah. I think a big thing with your characters is figuring out, if you know your world, is figuring out if you want the character to be like an insider or an outsider. Like, are they a part of the system or not? Like, because my current book, the whole like world idea had to do with memories. And so I had to figure out like if I wanted this to be a character who was a part of this whole like magic system involving memories, or if she was outside of that. And she is outside of it. She's like someone who like refuses to like be a part of this magic system. So you have to figure out like what their position is in that world if you have a world first. To create the most conflict, like Megan said.
Yay, make them miserable.
Make them face their fears.
We had a question along these same lines from Nicole. How do you flesh out a character? You know, go from blue-eyed girl that can talk to animals to an actual person that people will care about.
I hope you all write blue-eyed girls who talk to animals now.
Yes. I think again, like I was talking
quizzes.
Ooh, yeah, those are fun.
Yeah. As if I'm the character, not for me.
Just for me, just for fun.
Just for me.
For me, a lot of it is looking at their fears. If I know what someone is afraid of, and if I know what they'll do anything to get, then I feel like if I know those two things, then I know enough to start writing that character's story. Like, what do they want more than anything in the world, and what are they the most terrified of happening?
Yeah. And I usually figure out those things by figuring out their backstory. Like a lot of times for like my major characters, and sometimes I do this after I've started writing the book when I realize I don't know them well enough. I'll just like take out a notebook and just start like free writing about like their like life and like the emotional baggage they carry and why they're carrying that, and like what things they've lost, because those are the types of things they're going to fight for. So like just figuring out like what scars they already have, or what lack of scars they have. Do they come from like a really pampered background and they don't know to fear things yet? Like, that can be really compelling too. So
and along those lines, a lot of it is you're going to kind of discover on the way, especially if you are writing a dynamic character. They will probably change during the book depending on what they've been through, what you put them through. So they're you can leave some of that up to like the writing process and kind of discovering who they are while you're going through that.
Yeah, and a lot of what makes them dynamic is how they change throughout the story. So.
For sure. And sometimes I'll, like Emma said, like I think I know a character, but then I start writing it and it's like, wait a minute. And that's what revisions are for. In NaNoWRIMO in particular, I will just like stick a note on the page that is like, from here on out, this happened in my character's backstory. Go fix it later. And just like keep moving forward.
Yeah.
We had a really good question from Davis Hicks. If I've already used an idea but it didn't turn out well and I want to try to use it again, how do I figure out what to scrap and what to keep?
Ooh.
I think that depends on the like where did it go wrong. Like,
like what were your
how much
favorite
of this-
things about it?
Yeah.
I would start with like a brand new like notebook or like Scrivener folder or whatever it is you use, like brand new and blank. Like don't try to like use an old document or an old notebook and like cut things out and keep things. Like I would just
I always keep way too much when I do that because I'm like, look at everything I did. Look at all this
so
work.
great. And you're like, I have to do this all over again.
Yeah.
Like think of it as a new project, because when you think of it as like redoing an old project, it's just kind of like upsetting.
Well,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's more work to try and save stuff that from the old draft that isn't really working than to just write new stuff.
Agreed.
Yeah. I think definitely figuring out how to diagnose what the problems were, like why did you stop writing it, or if you finished the book, like why do you think that it needs to be completely redone, and then looking at those problems and seeing like if it's a problem with the plot just being too simplistic or too cliche or something, and you love the characters and you love the world, then just save all of that, like save all the things you love and just give them a new plot, which is a lot harder than it sounds. But finding the things that make you excited and would make you want to try again, I guess. I just had like a Michael Scott moment where I started the sentence and it was like, I'm gonna find the end of it.
Keep searching, it's in there somewhere.
We had another question. Oh, we got some clarification from Davis that it was a rushed draft. So basically a good idea executed badly is what they said it was.
In which case, you have learned some things not to do, so that's valuable too.
And you can always take the same idea and try it again. Like you don't need to necessarily change anything.
Yeah.
It's a bad draft, but it's just a draft. So
Yeah. And you've probably gotten to know your characters better now, so you have a better idea of like what they would do. So.
Yeah. One of the things I love about rewriting is that it's like, I already know all you guys. I already know how you respond in situations, and I don't feel the need to plot as much because it's like I already know what direction not to go. And I can just kind of start and just see what happens. We had another question. Jody asked, what do you do when you get stuck on a story and try working on another, but the story you were stuck on in the first place won't leave your mind, so you go back to it and you're still stuck? So I guess like story you're passionate about, how do you push through when you're stuck?
You have to figure out what you're stuck, like why you're stuck, like what's the problem. Because it's obviously not that you don't love it because you wanted to come back to it. So there's something that just isn't working about like the plot or the character. So you have to figure that out, which is like a hard answer because it's like, how do you figure it out? But
yeah.
I feel like for me, a lot of times it's just that I put my characters in a situation that I don't know how to get them out of, in which case I might suggest skipping ahead a little bit if you need to, and then
sometimes I write like, clever way to get out goes here.
I wrote a scene the other day where I was like, and some more conversation that really illuminates the characters, because I don't know.
Nice.
But like, I also think that sometimes it's because you're maybe focusing on the wrong things plot-wise. I don't know how to explain this. Like the whole idea of transitions, where sometimes I do this all the time, where I feel like I have to get my characters from point A to point B, but you can actually just skip to point B. Like, just have them get to their next destination and the next like exciting thing. You don't have to do that, because sometimes that's what really slows me down, is trying to do like these scenes in between things that I think I need to like flesh out word count, really, if we're being honest. And it's boring. Like, the scene is like, I love the story, but the scene is boring, and that's why I get stuck. So it could be that, like,
we're even trying to find ways to make it interesting, but it's really not going to be interesting. Like, they're just getting from A to B. And sometimes it's just a walk to a place.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be there.
And it says summarized perfectly, and they walked for 3 days. And on the 3rd day, they reached their destination.
They reached a plot point.
Exactly. The 3rd day, they reached a plot point.
I'm really bad about it because I want like a higher word count. So I'm like, I have to include all these superfluous scenes so that I have enough words.
Yeah, I like read other people's stuff, and I'm like, how do all these scenes blend so perfectly with each other? Like, how does this work? How did you know to put this scene next?
I just remembered a question from a ways up that I did not answer, and I forgot about it, but I just remembered. And it was a question about writing horror. I can't find it because we've got a lot of great discussion going on. But it was about writing a horror book for the first time and asking if there were any book recommendations for preparing to write a horror novel, which I do have recommendations.
Yes. Is it YA?
My favorite.
Is it YA horror, or is it like horror? Because if
these books will be useful for any age category.
But fair, fine, okay.
Megan's been waiting her whole life for someone to ask this question.
I think about it all the time.
All right, go.
My favorite is How to Write Killer Fiction by Carolyn Wheat. That's How to Write Killer Fiction. It focuses more on like the mystery and suspense aspect of horror. 2 other great ones are On Writing Horror, a handbook by the Horror Writers Association, and Writer's Workshop of Horror. And you can Google all of those and they should just come right up, like the Amazon links. Everyone should write horror. I love it. We
also just had a book club on a horror novel called The Call by Tyler O'Geelan. That it was a couple of weeks back.
So good.
So it was our September book club. Or was it August? It was August, sorry. It was our August book. Wow, already? Jesus, okay. It was our August book club. So you should go check that out, because it was a really great book, and we had a lot to say about it. And it's really creepy.
Yeah. We had another question. How detailed is your nano plot before you start writing in November?
I'm super pantser, so someone else should answer this question.
I have like here are scenes I really want to include, or I have here are some basic plot points I need to get to have this other thing, like the main conflict happen. But yeah, I'm kind of just like, I'm just gonna write, like, see what happens.
It is different with every book that I write, so I don't have a very good answer for you. It depends on the book and like how much guidance I need going into it, I guess. It's always different.
Obviously we'll talk about this more when we talk about outlining in week 3. But generally in the idea phase, I like to do like what Rachel mentioned, where I just write down a list of all the scenes that I would like to have happen, like all the things that I'm excited about writing. And so I usually have a list of that, and that typically includes a couple of the major plot points. And I like to know my beginning and my end.
I would personally say it's a good idea to at least know like your major plot points before you start Nano, even if you're going to pants it, just so you have an idea of where you're going with it. Because I think sometimes that's
at the minimum, I kind of have an idea of like, I want to end with this big scene. And I have had nanos where that's like all I've had is, I'm going to have them end with this big scene and we're going to find some stuff for them to do in the meantime. But at the very minimum, yeah. You have somewhere for them to be going.
Yeah. We had a question from Saber and Solus. Do you do any character sheets for your characters to give you a basic premise?
No, because I've done it and it was not useful.
Yeah, I tried so hard to be like, I'm a super organized writer who has character sheets for all her characters, and I can't do it. It's too analytical, and then I just forget stuff, or like I'll be writing and I'll make something up. I'm like, wait, that's not on the character sheet, and like stress myself out because I like have to stick to the character sheet, which you don't.
That's like the one planning thing I sometimes do. You usually just like Scrivener has like character sheets that you can fill out, and I usually do those sometimes. Not usually, sometimes, but
I'll say I don't do any like standardized character sheet because I tried that once where I like had like a list of things to know about every character, and not the same things are important for the same character for like every character. So it was like some of the stuff was just useless for certain characters. And anyway, so like I just have a page in my notebook for like each character where I just like I write down things as I think of them, like their parents died and it's made them scared of something, you know. It's just like the really important things as I figure them out. I keep written down somewhere, so. And then I forget about them and I contradict myself and I have to fix that later.
Well, then they get sassy in the middle of the book and they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. They're like, actually, I don't like Orange Crush. I like cream soda. And you're like,
suddenly
okay.
One of those dead parents is just there and
Yeah, exactly.
the whole time it's not a big deal because I forgot that they were supposed to be dead. I don't know. Things.
Yeah.
Oh man, the old turning up alive thing again.
I used to use sheets a lot, like for world building too. I used to use the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America world building worksheet that has like 500 questions on it. And I usually found that it was useful up to a point, and then it became restricting almost. It was like, well, you can't move on. You don't know the answers to all these things. How could you ever start writing the book? You don't know how the sanitation system works.
World building sheets stress me out for that reason because I can't figure out all of it. And then I'm like, oh no.
It's like the most logical, organized side of writing. And it's just for all the artsy, creative people. We're like, we can't do it. We can't fit everything in a box.
I feel like if people ever expect the worlds in my books to like be super logical and make a ton of sense, and really you're gonna be disappointed because like I don't care enough that I'm like, sure, they have electricity in this fantasy world, sounds good to me.
Got invented in the real world.
Exactly, it couldn't be invented somewhere else.
I'm like, I want my characters to have toilets, okay? So this world has plumbing. I will put them through a lot, but I will not put them through no
outhouses.
Oh gosh. We've got some
Tolkien, I am not.
Same. We've got some great recommendations in the discussion section. If character sheets do work for you, I know they do work for a lot of people. This just happens to be a crop of writers who don't use them as often. We had a question. I want to say it was from Courtney M. Yes, from Courtney M. Do you prefer fast or slow drafting?
Slow.
Fast.
Fast.
I wish I could draft fast, but I just can't.
Yeah, I wish I could draft fast.
Mhm.
Yeah, no.
I just need no time to think about it, and I will fix all the problems much later. We had a question from Leah. Any tips for how to make a character more active? I have an idea for a character who likes to avoid conflict, but still want her to be active and not passive.
Well, in that case, the activity could even be going to like lengths to avoid conflict, as long as they're like making their own choices and not just responding to things, right?
Yeah.
So if they're like actively saying, okay, I'm going to deliberately be in this place where I think I will avoid the conflict.
And a lot of times when you're like actively trying to avoid conflict like that, it ends up creating conflict because people are like, why won't you talk to me about this? Like, why do you keep disappearing? Like, that can totally be like your character's thing, is they just like disappear when they're uncomfortable and there's conflict, and like that causes more problems. You know. So. Also put them in situations where they have to make decisions. Like, and that makes more great conflict because they don't want to, but they have to.
Oh, you know a book that's
Like
a great
The Good
example
Place.
of this? It's Magic in My It's Magic in My Bones by Kelly Sheridan.
Hey!
That's Magic
It
in
is a
My
great
Bones
example.
by Kelly Sheridan. A character
Kelly's
who wants to
eternal.
avoid the conflict, but
Yes.
cannot.
Why is it conflict?
I was thinking of the TV show The Good Place, where there's one character named Chidi who hates making decisions.
Yes!
And so part of the conflict of the show is that people keep trying to make him make decisions. So
Everyone
like,
should watch that show.
everyone, like all writers should watch that show because it's so good.
I love it.
There's so many writing lessons in it. And it's
There
amazing.
really are. Oh, now I just want to talk about The Good Place. We had a question from Melody. What are your Hogwarts houses? Which I love this question. So
Ravenclaw.
Also
Yeah.
Ravenclaw.
Slytherin.
Gryffindor.
I change my mind every time someone asks me. Today I'll go with Slytherin.
Hey. You haven't taken the test yet, Kyra?
I have. I've taken it several times and I've gotten 3 different results every single, like,
Oh, okay.
I've been sorted into everything except Hufflepuff, so.
Well,
Yeah, we don't do
I'm gonna go
Hufflepuff
with
in the
Howard.
WordNerds, okay? I don't think we've ever had a Hufflepuff WordNerd.
well, the sorting
sorry,
hat
I
does
can't
take your
contribute that.
decision into consideration, so yeah, you
Yeah.
can be whatever you like.
Like, literally, though, if you ask me on a different day, I'll probably give you a different answer.
That's okay. Yeah, actually, it's really like that's something where people are like, oh, find out like what your Hogwarts house is, or figure out what your character's Hogwarts house is, and I was just like, oh, okay, that's just like a ridiculous little whatever, but it actually is when you really think about it. Those are like core values of a person, and I'm just like the brilliance of J.K. Rowling just keeps hitting me randomly, where I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. As like a Slytherin, you know, like, oh, it's
kind of.
yeah.
Kind of the ironic thing is, even though like I don't really put myself in a house very well, that's like one of the things I'm always like one of the very first things I figure out about all my characters is what their Hogwarts house is.
Because
Like,
it would actually help.
It tells you so much.
Yeah,
It does.
when I'm like doing a like character sheet, I always figure out like what their Hogwarts house is. I don't know. I have like a whole list of things that I always know for all of my characters.
I think like Hogwarts houses are most like a cheat because it's kind of like it just gives you a snap, like core of what that person finds important.
Yeah.
And
it like tells you how they're gonna handle problems.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have to be careful with it of like not taking a Gryffindor and like forgetting to make Hermione's and Neville's as well. That like it can be easy to say, oh, Gryffindor is this.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that like I have a tendency to write Slytherin love interests, but the love interests are all pretty different from each other. So you know, there's variation.
Well, I mean, I'm a Slytherin and I'm currently dating a Hufflepuff, and it's kind of weird, but
The most powerful combination.
everyone's like, "Oh, that's like super weird," like that. I'm like, it's going okay so
You can
far.
balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw this like whole thing on like why Slytherins and Hufflepuffs belong together, and I need to try and find it and send it to you.
Also, my
not,
best
not even
friend.
just romantically, just like
No, my best friend is also a Hufflepuff, so I think that's kind of hilarious how that worked out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm married to a Gryffindor, and there's no chill in our house. It's just all Gryffindor, all yelling all the time. We had a question from Courtney. Any tips for writing a slow brewing romance? I have 2 characters that have to get together by book 2 for the plot to work, but they're both pretty quiet characters, and the story is written in 3rd person.
I like slow burn.
Yes. That's probably where it helps to like really go with what your characters would actually do. Like you want to focus on making sure the readers see the attraction, but that they're not actively pursuing each other because that's not really who they are. So eventually they just kind of get forced together. Like, oh, we cannot deny this any longer.
Yes, I love a good characters get forced together and have to confront their feelings. And I know that the kids, so there's a Twitter account that's like typical YA hero. And it's just it's a parody account that tweets like ridiculous things that, you know, YA heroes are apt to say or do. And one of the things was like every hotel in all of the entire coast of the US only has a single bed.
Yeah.
Oh, what are the odds? Like that kind of thing.
Like one room and it only has one bed. And
yeah,
no
exactly.
Couch.
I as like ridiculous and stereotypical as it is, I love those kind of situations that force people together, and then I'm just like, you like each other.
The tension,
yeah, the tension building. That's good.
I'm a huge sucker for just like they're just doing things that they both enjoy, like they're connecting on something. So, you know, if they both play piano and they're sitting on the piano bench together,
Yeah,
like just like little things like that. Like just where's their common ground?
And also like little like their arms brush and like
those like little tiny
like, little things, you know.
Yeah. And noting things like that shows that your character is noting those things.
Yes.
So like it's not just a thing that's happening, it's a thing that your character is like hyper aware of.
Yeah, even in 3rd person. Like if you mention it, the reader's gonna be like, oh, this is happening.
I love, and you can totally translate this into books too, but I love in like TV shows when like 2 people just like look at each other across the room, like they happen to they just catch each other's eye. Like when there's a bunch of other people, they catch each other's eye, and you're like, oh my gosh, like you're they like
make it already.
You can like feel the tension between the 2 gazes. It's the best.
I'm a huge sucker too for moments where your characters like have an understanding of one another. Like my favorite ever romantic moment, which isn't even really that romantic, is in Parks and Recreation. Leslie, the main character, has just met this guy, Ben, and they get off to kind of a rough start, and they end up going out to get a drink with one another, and he's talking about his career goals and how he's a budget specialist because he wants to eventually run for office. And he says, but you know what that's like. You want to run for office someday, right? And no one has ever like talked to her like that before. And she just like looks at him like, yeah, I do. You knew that without even me telling you. And I swoon every single time it happens.
They're one of my favorite couples of all time.
Yes.
And they have so many moments like that too, where they just like get each other. Like, because it takes them. They're a good slow burn like example because it takes them a long time to get together because like he's her superior at work or whatever. And so it's like, all these little things where there's like tension between them. It's so good.
Well, and I especially like that when there are like a lot of kind of like surface things that are like they seem different, but then like on a core level, they've actually got a lot in common that they connect over.
Yes.
Yeah, and the more connection moments like that you have, the more people are able to build up a line of trust and friendship, and then everyone's happy and making out, and it's great. We had a question, do you guys use the Myers-Briggs at all? And yes.
I was trying to think of that before. I find it more thorough than going with just Hogwarts houses, but it's also a lot more work.
A lot of work, yeah. I rarely use it just because I feel like I'm already a slow enough writer that I don't need to like waste my time with other things, so I like try not to focus on it too much.
I use it for characters who I'm having a hard time figuring out.
Yeah,
See that?
for sure.
Mm.
Sometimes I won't like take the full, well, not the full, the free version of the test that lots of people provide, because I have a harder time with that. I like to look at like the list of all the different types, and see like, oh, this one seems to really fit my character, so maybe they're an ESFP, and I just like read the descriptions and see famous other characters who are that personality type, and I find that, like Kyra said, it really helps with characters I'm having a difficult time figuring out.
Because usually the characters I already know pretty well. I could pretty much tell you which one they are. And even then, sometimes I'll still go and look like at the little descriptions and be, like, see if there's any way I can kind of add like, oh, they're often motivated by this. I'll leave that in or whatever. But
Yeah. We did a live chat a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, on the Myers-Briggs personality tests. So you can probably find that if you look up Myers-Briggs WordNerds.
That one was a lot of fun. I just remember really liking
Yeah.
that chat for some reason.
I remember it was like right after I moved to Orlando, so.
Aw, good times. I had a question I wanted to end with. We've been going about an hour. If I missed your question, it's most likely because it was a more in-depth one about plotting, and we're going to do a whole hour-long chat on that. So I'd hate to give you like a watered-down answer when we are going to give really solid plotting advice later this month. I think for now, at least for me, the big challenge in prepping for Nano is going to be just really hammering down the idea, coming up with like, okay, who are the characters? What's the main conflict? What's the world? What was the question I was going to ask? It's going great. It's been a long day.
That's okay. You can ask it in a different chat.
Yeah. Does anyone have any final thoughts on how to develop or select? Oh, that's what it is. If you have lots of ideas that seem to have legs, I have to use that phrase a lot today. That's not a phrase I use in my daily life. But when you have multiple ideas that seem like they could make good books, how do you choose which one to write?
a lot of times I'll throw them like a short little 2-paragraph summary of each of them in like our writing group folder. And then I'll just show up and talk about them. And usually whichever one I spend most of my time talking about, that's usually the one I'm most excited about, and I go with that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You could also try like writing like an opening scene for each of them. And I usually find like once I've written an opening scene, I know like if it's going to work and if I'm enjoying it and if I have a fleshed out enough idea to be writing it. Because if I get stuck in the first scene, it means I'm not ready to write the book yet.
Truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even get through that.
Yeah, like in this early idea phase, like your excitement level should just be over 9,000. Like just super stoked. Like if you're already bored with the idea, you're not going to be able to get through November.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking about the scale. Like on a scale of like who knows to who knows, like it has to be at least 9,000. Like, we don't know the scale, but it has to be at least 9,000.
Yeah, does anyone have any final thoughts about ideas?
If you have more than one you're confident you can write, I usually go with the one that is the most developed. Even if it's not the one I'm fully most excited about right now, the one that I'm going to struggle with the least, that I know the most of the plot, most of the characters, and hope for the best.
Especially for Nano. The more you know, the easier Nano will probably be. So.
And then you can still like let the idea you're super excited about kind of like percolate in the back of your head while you're writing the other one. That is completely normal.
Yeah, for sure.
Percolate. That's a good word.
I'm just thinking that.
Kelly's so smart.
Good metaphor.
Truth. Thank you so much for watching tonight, Word Nerds. We will be back next week talking all about getting inspiration prepared for November so that you don't spend the first week surfing Pinterest or Spotify or whatever. Really finding all the things that are going to inspire you early so that you can have them ready come word sprinting time. We hope to see you all then. We also have videos every single day of the week. Kelly has new books out now. Go buy them on Amazon. Kelly Sheridan.
We're just going to shamelessly plug you, Kelly. You know it.
Yeah. We don't have books out. We have to plug you. But yes, we will be back next week. Videos every day. Please subscribe. Give us thumbs up if you like us. You can give us thumbs down too. We'll be a little sad, but we'll understand and still want you to watch our videos. And we love you. And we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.